Welcome to the tutorial for this chunky finger knit Beatrice the Bumblebee. The supplies you'll need for the Mini Beatrice the Bumblebee is chunky blanket yarn. You can find this at a craft store like Hobby Lobby, Michael's, JOANN. You can even find it at Walmart. So this is jumbo size 7 chunky blanket yarn. The colors you'll need for the yarn are a yellow color, black, and white for the wings. These are all from Hobby Lobby. The yarn is called Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss. This is in the color mustard and then just black and white. You'll need a pair of scissors and a little bit of Poly-fil. If you got the DIY kit from me, all you'll need is a pair of scissors. Everything else is included in the kit. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that you can always pause or rewind the video tutorial at any point if you need to. Rewinding the video as you practice to get each step down is always helpful, but you can always send me an email if you find that you need extra help. I am always happy to help in any way that I can so that you can accomplish the goal of making this Mini Beatrice the Bumblebee. Keep in mind that if you are finger knitting for the first time, or if you're learning to finger knit in a new way for the first time, that it could take some time and practice of each step before you are able to get it down, which is perfectly fine. Everyone learns at a different pace, so take your time if you need it, or you can always fast forward if you need to as well. I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and thanks so much for being here. So to begin, we'll be working with this mustard color. I'm just going to put everything else off to the side. I'm going to find the starting point of my yarn and just unravel it a little bit. Okay, so to start we need to create a slip knot. To do that we need to start over here and leave about 6 to 8 inches of tail yarn. So I'm going to create my slip knot up here. I am going to create a loop by crisscrossing the yarn over, and that creates the loop. To continue, we are going to take our thumb and pointer and we are going to put it through that loop like so. And then we are going to take our working yarn, this is our tail yarn, which I have just in between my palm and my pinky and ring finger. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and with my thumb and pointer I am going to grab that working yarn and pull up a loop. Okay, and then to tighten it I am going to take my tail yarn and holding on to the loop we just created I am going to pull down on that tail yarn to tighten it. So my loop right now is about 3 fingers wide. I need it to be about 2 fingers wide. So to make the loop a little bit smaller, I'm going to pull on my working yarn and hold at the base of the knot. And I'm just going to pull that working yarn to make it a little bit smaller. Okay, just a little bit smaller. Okay, and I have about 2 fingers wide for that loop now. Okay, so this is our first loop. This counts as chain 1. We are going to do a total of 8 chains. So I'm going to pull up 7 more loops to create a total of 8 chained loops. So this is my first loop. Again, I'm going to take my thumb and my pointer, I'm going to put it through that loop, and I'm just holding on to the tail yarn again between my palm and these 2 fingers here. So with your working yarn and those 2 fingers through that loop, you're going to pull up another loop like so and then straighten it out. So we have 2 loops chained on so far. You want to make sure that your loops are all about the same size. You want them to be about 2 fingers wide. So again, put your fingers through that loop that you just created, and then go ahead and pull up another loop and then straighten it out. So that is my 3rd loop, and then just keep going. Put your thumb and pointer through the last loop you created with those two fingers, grab onto the working yarn, pull up a loop, and straighten it. If you lose count on how many loops that you are at, you can always go back and count. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you can't quite see the separation of each individual loop, you can just pull a little bit and you'll be able to see the separation from each loop. So I'm at 5 and I have 3 more to go to pull up before I complete my chain. Again, make sure that your loops are all about the same size, making them about 2 fingers in width. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and count to make sure that I have 8 loops total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so here is my 8 loops in a chain, and the next step is to create a circle. So here is your tail yarn. Go ahead and take your tail yarn and you're going to push it through your last loop that you created, which is where my finger is through right now. So take that tail yarn and push it through and then pull it all the way until you hit that slip knot that we created at the very beginning. So your tail yarn is going to be facing away from you along with your working yarn that is also going to be facing away from you. Now that we've created our circle, we are going to add loops to the top of each of these loops. So this counts as row 1. We are going to work on the second row now. So we're going to leave our tail yarn hanging down and then we're going to be working with our working yarn. So we are going to be working in a clockwise direction, pulling up loops. So this is my working yarn. It is pulled through this loop here. We're going to go 1 over to the next loop. I'm going to put my finger through that next loop that we are going to be pulling up a loop through to have that as a guide. I'm going to take my working yarn and with the finger that is pushed through that loop, I am going to pull up another loop with my working yarn, like so. And then we're going to be working all the way around the circle. So here is where my working yarn is pulled through. So I'm going to go 1 over, put my finger through so I know where I'm going and so that I can pull up a loop with my working yarn. Go ahead and pull up another loop. So again, we're working on the second row now. As you're doing this, your yarn or your circle is going to be flipping inside out, which is what we want it to be doing. So I'm just going to push that back through so we can continue on. So here is the last loop that I've created here. Here is the base of that loop. I'm going to go 1 loop over and pull up another loop. Again, you want to make sure that your loops are on the small side. You want to make sure that they're about 2 fingers in width, and then make sure that each loop is about the same size. So go 1 loop over again and pull up a loop. Find that next loop over and pull up another loop. Here is my next loop over. Pull up a loop. Okay, so now we've hit where the slip knot is, and you should be able to feel that because you won't be able to put your finger through that slip knot. It looks about the same probably on video, but on your own project you'll be able to see or feel that this is the slip knot and you're not going to be able to put your finger through there to get another loop up. So instead of going through the slip knot, we are going to go 1 more over, which is where the tail yarn is. So at this point the tail yarn is going to be facing up. This is where the loop where your tail is poking through. So the first step is to take our tail yarn and push it through the center of the circle so it's facing back down. So take your tail yarn, push it through that circle, the center of it, and just push it down so it's facing down again. Okay, so here is the loop that we just pulled up. Here is your slip knot, and here is your next loop over, which the tail yarn is pulled through. So go ahead and put your finger through that loop, take your working yarn and just pull up another loop. And then go ahead and take your tail yarn and that last loop that you just pulled up and just give it a tug either way, so that way it straightens out. And then the last loop, this is the 8th loop, we are going to be working with this one here. This loop is facing inwards rather than side to side like the rest of the loops were. So I'm just going to put my finger through that loop and just twist it so it is now facing side to side like the rest of the loops were. Go ahead with your working yarn and just pull up that last loop. Okay, and at this point you should have 8 loops around to complete your second row. You can go ahead and count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have completed our second row, and now we're going to continue on for one more row with the yellow yarn. So this is where it gets a little bit easier for pulling up loops. This is my last loop where my working yarn is here. We're going to go one over and just pull up a loop. And again, that's about 2 fingers wide. You want to make sure that all of your loops are about the same size, and just continue going to each next loop and pull it up. And if you lose count on how many loops you're at, I will show you how to count backwards and where you need to stop to complete a row. Okay, so at this point I am lined back up with the tail yarn. As you can see, it goes straight up in line with the tail yarn. Now we need to go one more loop over. So here we are. This is one loop that the last loop that I've completed. It's lined up with the tail yarn. I'm going to go one loop over, and that is when I know that I have completed a row. And then to count backwards to see how many rows you're at, you can just go 1, 2, 3. You're just counting down. And then of course again you can just pull a little bit to see that separation of your loops. Okay, so we have completed 3 rows of the yellow, and before we continue on we are actually going to close up the bottom. So this is a little bit different. If you've done any of my other tutorials, this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to close up the bottom now so we can add the eyes. So to close up the bottom, we're just going to leave our working yarn here. We're going to leave everything attached. We're just going to focus on the bottom. So we were working upright. You're just going to flip it around, and you're going to use your tail yarn to close up the bottom, which is actually going to be the face of the bee. So take your tail yarn. Here is where your tail yarn is. This is the loop that the tail yarn is attached to. You are going to go one over and find that next loop, which is right here. You're going to take your tail yarn, starting from the outside of the bee towards the inside of the bee. So pull your yarn starting from the outside and push it towards the inside, and then you can go ahead and just tighten it. Now wrap your hands or your fingers around that loop that we just put this tail yarn through and pull it slightly to tighten it. Now we're going to go to the next loop over to the right of it. Find that next loop again. Push your tail yarn through and then tighten it just a little bit to get it nice and snug close to the last loop. And you're just going to go all the way around until your circle is closed up. Next one over, again working from the outside first towards the inside. That's the direction that we are pulling our tail yarn. It might be a little bit hard to see on the screen each individual loop that I'm pulling up, but if you just feel around on your bee, you should be able to find each loop. It's just one over from your last loop. Okay, tighten, and that was my last one, I believe. Yep, that was my last loop. So now I have my tail yarn still sticking up here. Now I'm going to create a knot at the base of this tail yarn. To do that, just do a regular knot and then just pull it down. Okay, so here's my knot at the base of the bee. I'm going to take my tail yarn. I'm going to find the center of the circle that I just closed up, so that's where my finger is poking out of right now, so I know where I need to go. I'm going to take my tail yarn and just poke that through the center of the hole, and then you can go back here and just pull it out. Keep pulling until you hit the knot, and then just poke that knot through. So this is what you are left with once you close up the bottom of the bee. Okay, so this is the front of the bee, or the face of the bee. Now we are just going to take some black yarn and we are going to put the eyes on the bee. So here's my black. I'm going to cut about 6 to 8 inches of yarn, and I'm going to do that twice because we have 2 eyes. And then I'm just going to take off that extra fluff, that way it doesn't go everywhere while I'm pulling it through the yarn. I'm going to move the black over. Okay. So I think one of the trickiest parts with the mini bee is the placement of the eyes, but you will be able to just continue to play around with the eyes to make them as perfect as you can. You can always just continue to take them out and replace them until you get it the way that you would like them to be. So on this finished bee here, you'll see that we have 2 straight lines that are parallel to each other. We are going to create that on this here. So I'm going to find my working yarn here, and I like to hold it away from me, straight out, and then I typically will put just one end here, pull it through a little bit on the back side, and then go across, going this way, and pull it down. So here's my one eye, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now again, you don't have to do it exactly the way that I'm doing it. You can play around with your bee and see where your eyes fit perfectly, just going as straight and parallel as possible. You also want to make sure that your eyes are evenly placed within the circle of the face. So you want to find a good spot, push one side in, and then do the same thing going down. I like to put both eyes in first before I tie up the backs. That way I can take a look at it and make sure that they are nice and even, parallel from each other, and within the circle of the face. So these look pretty even and I'm happy with them. Again, you can continue to play around with it until they look good on your bee. So then I'm going to take on the back side, so this is where the tail yarn is poking out and also the strands of black yarn. I'm going to make sure that I'm grabbing the 2 pieces of black yarn that are attached to this one eye, and then I am just going to do a triple knot with these 2 pieces of yarn to secure the eyes in. Okay, so there is one, and you can see that this one's pulled in a little bit more now than this one before it's tied in. So I'm going to take my 2 pieces of yarn that are attached to this one, and I'm just going to even it out a little bit because this one is a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to pull on this side a little bit and then pull that one. Okay, so now they're even, and again, just do a triple knot with those 2 pieces. So here are my 2 eyes. They look a little bit uneven right now. I am just going to play around with that a little bit to get them a little bit more even. So you can do that by just pulling out the one side a little bit more and then pushing the other side in a little bit more. And then you can do this as well, adjust the eyes when we finish the bee as well and when we have it stuffed. Once we have it stuffed, the polyfill is going to be pushing on these 2 knots, which will help bring out the eyes a little bit more. Okay, so once you have your 2 eyes in, you are going to continue picking up with making the bee. So right now it's pretty flat, but as you continue to add on more yarn, it will take that shape like so. So go ahead and find your working yarn, and then get your black yarn, and then we are going to tie a knot right on this working yarn, right on the back side of the bee. So go ahead and just do a double knot. That one counts as your first, and then go ahead and do a second one, tighten it, and then take your black yarn and then holding on to this loop here, go ahead and tighten it going the opposite direction as well. You have a little bit of black here. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut a little bit off. I want to make sure that I'm not cutting all the way at the knot. I want to leave a little bit of black yarn there still to account for any slippage that might happen with the knot as we go along. Okay, so now you have your 2 pieces of yarn attached here. You're going to leave them both like this, but we are going to work with just our black yarn for 1 row. So we did 3 rows total of the yellow yarn, and now we're going to pick up with the black yarn and do 1 row of black. So this was the last loop that we did with the yellow. We're going to go 1 over and continue on with the black. Go ahead and pull it up. Now as you're pulling up your black yarn, you want to make sure that it's as close as possible to this last loop. So instead of pulling from over here, you want to pull your loops up as close to that last loop as possible. Okay, and then make sure that you are pulling your yarn at about 2 fingers in width. Okay, so again, make sure you're pulling super close to the base of that yellow loop. Pull it up. As you pull up your loops close together, it's going to start creating a curved look rather than you're having that flat face that the bee had. Okay, so now you have your two black loops on either side, and then you'll see you have your knot kind of right in the middle of those two loops. So we've done one loop total of the black. We are going to now switch to the yellow. So to do that, we are going to pull or cross our black yarn over top our yellow yarn here. So our knot is in between these two right now. I am going to pull my black yarn tight so it's close and it's right behind the knot. Okay, so now that I have my black yarn close and tight over top the yellow yarn and over top the knot, I am now going to take my yellow yarn and I am going to pull up a loop through that next black loop. So here's what we are left with. I'm just going to take my black yarn here and I'm just going to tug on it just a little bit so that way my black loop here is as close as possible to my next yellow loop. Okay, and we are just going to continue to go around like as before, putting my finger through that next loop. Here's the last loop that I did. I'm going to pull it nice and close and pull up a loop. We're going to do one row total of the yellow yarn before switching back to the black yarn. Make sure that your loops are about 2 fingers wide. Okay, so we have 2 yellows on either side, so now we know that we need to switch back to the black yarn. Okay, so now that we ended on the yellow and we're switching to black, we're going to take the yellow this time and we're going to bring that over top the black yarn, find the black yarn, pull them close. I'm just going to be pushing down kind of on this knot here to make sure that it's out of the way, and you're just crisscrossing that black and yellow yarn like so. Now you're going to pick up with the black and pull up a loop with the black yarn. So our yellow yarn is now out of the way and we're just working with our black yarn. And again, we are going to do one row total of the black yarn. Again, make sure that you are pulling close to that last loop. Okay, and we know that we have completed it when we have 2 black loops next to each other. Now at this point we are going to cut off the black yarn. We are going to leave about 3 inches of yarn. Go ahead and cut it. I'm just going to take the extra fluff off to the side, and we are done with the black. So this is what we are left with. We are left with our yellow yarn and that 3 inches of our black yarn. We are going to tie a triple knot right at the base of the yellow and the black yarn. So here is my first knot. Go ahead and pull it so it's nice and close to the back side of the bee. So that is my first knot. I'm going to create my second knot, and then on that third knot you want to make sure that you are pulling your black yarn so it is facing towards the inside of the bee rather than out. So I'll show you how to do that. So instead of pulling your loop over top the yellow yarn and pulling through, because now that black yarn is facing out, we don't want that because we don't want the yarn poking through that bee. We want our black yarn to go on the back side of the yellow yarn, and then pull that loop through, and now it is facing, go ahead and tighten it, and it is facing the inside of the bee now. Go ahead and cut, so you're leaving just a little bit of black right at that knot here, but you're not cutting all the way. You're not cutting all the way close to the knot, again, to account for any slippage that might happen as we're working with the yarn. So we are back to just our yellow yarn. We have this big old knot here, but as we continue going around, it will disappear and only be on the inside of the bee. So go ahead with your next loop over, take your yellow yarn, pull up a loop, and make sure that your knot is right on the back side of that loop that you just pulled up. Continue to go all the way around. We're going to do 3 rows total again of the yellow yarn. Again, making sure that your loops are about 2 fingers wide and they are all about the same size, pulling the loops close together. So these are now both yellow, so you know that you have 2 more rows to go. So this is where your knot is. Make sure, for this one especially, that you are pulling your yarn as close as possible. So you're grabbing from here instead of here. Grab as close as possible to make sure you really close that knot on the inside. Because if you create a lot of slack and you have some yarn here, it allows for the knot to poke through. But just make sure you pull it nice and close and the knot will have a harder time poking through. So continue around. This is the tail yarn that's still poking out. I'm just going to push that in so it's not in my way as I continue around. Okay, so I've completed the second row. I have 1, 2, and then on this side I have 1, 1, 2. And now I just have 1 more row to go. So that's 8 more loops. I have 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and then just count on the other side, 1, 2, 3. So I have 3 rows going down on each side. That's how I know that I've completed the row. And here is how the bee is looking so far. Go ahead and cut off, leaving about 6 to 8 inches of yarn. Okay, so now we are going to move on to the wings, so grab your white yarn. We are going to create a slip knot again, leaving about 6 inches of yarn. Create your slip knot up here. So again, to create your slip knot, cross over your yarn with your thumb and your pointer, put it through that loop, and then grab your working yarn, pull up a loop, and then to tighten, grab your tail yarn and hold the loop you just created and pull. So again, you want them to be about 2 fingers wide. I'm just going to tighten it just a little bit. Okay, so here is my first loop. I am going to chain on 3 loops total. So this is 1. I'm going to take my pointer and thumb. I'm going to grab up with the working yarn another loop. So there is my second one, and one more to create my third loop. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to point my yarn, my chain upwards, and my working yarn is over here. So this was my last loop that I did. Now I am going to go all the way down here to that third loop on the right side, not the left side, but on the right side. I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to pull up a loop through this one here. So I have my first loop, second loop, third loop. I'm going to go through the third loop. Pull up a loop. So now we have two loops. We have one loop here, one loop there. You're going to take your top loop and you're going to pull it over top that last loop. Or another way to say it is to take this loop and you're going to be pulling this loop through the center of the top loop. But you're going to be pulling this one over top. So I will show you how to do that. I'm just going to put my thumb and pointer again into that top loop, but I am going to just turn it this way, and then I'm going to take my thumb and pointer, I'm going to grab on to that last loop that we created, and then pull it down. Okay, so I'm keeping my thumb in that loop. I have my tail yarn here, I have my working yarn here. I am going to cut about 6 inches or so. Again, just keeping my thumb in that loop. And then I'm going to take the yarn that I just cut and I'm going to push it through where my thumb is. Push it through, pull it, and then go ahead and just tighten it a little bit. Okay, so there is my first wing. Now we need to create a second one. Feel free to pause the video, rewind, slow it down at any point that you need. You can practice as many times until you get each step down. So I'm going to show you again slowly. Here is 6 to 8 inches of tail yarn. I'm going to create my slip knot up here. Cross your yarn over with your thumb and pointer, put it through. Grab your working yarn with your thumb and pointer, pull up that loop, and tighten with your tail yarn while holding on to the loop you just created. Okay, so this is almost 3 fingers wide. I'm just going to tighten it a little bit by pulling on my working yarn. Okay. So here is my first loop. I need to pull up 2 more loops to have 3 total. It's 2, and that's 3. So I'm going to turn my work so that last loop or my chain is now vertical instead of horizontal. Here is the last loop that I made. I am going to go down 2, so here's the first one, 1, 2, to that third loop. So 1, 2, here's the third loop. Now from the back side, I'm going to take my working yarn, I'm going to pull up another loop where my finger was in that third loop. Okay, so here's where I'm at. I have 1 loop, 2 loops. I'm going to take my top loop and pull it over top that last loop here. So putting my thumb and pointer through that top loop, I'm going to grab a hold of this loop here. This is the last loop that I created, and I'm just going to pull it over top that last loop, and I'm going to keep my thumb in that last loop that I had created so I don't lose track of it. Here's my tail yarn. I need my working yarn to cut about 6 inches. I'm going to remove that extra fluff. And then I'm going to take the yarn that I just cut and I'm going to pull it through where my thumb is. Pull it through, pull, and then once it's pulled through, just give it a little tug downwards to tighten it a little bit. Okay, so here is my second wing. Now it's time to attach them to my bee. So when you take a look at your bee, you want to place them evenly with your eyes. So on my finished bee here, you'll see that I have my wings here and they are lined up with the eyes. So I'm going to take a look at my bee. You can turn your bee any way now to see which way works best with the eyes and the wing placement. So here's the top of the bee. I am going to take a look at the different places that I can put the wings. If I put my wings here and here, I'm just going to use my hands as a guide. That looks like it will line up quite nice with the eyes. If you flip it around, you might find that this could be better or worse for the placement of the eyes. I think I like this side better, so I'm going to go with this side, and then I'm going to place the eyes right here in between this one stitch. I'm going to insert one strand of the yarn, and the other strand of the yarn, I'm going to place it right in line with the black stripes. So I'm going to put the bee one side in, and I'm just going to pull it until it hits the wing, and then I'm going to go down and pull the other side in. Now before you tie this in, go ahead and place your other wing. That way you can take a look at it with the eyes and see if you like the placement. So again, I'm just going one over, pulling either side of the wing in line with the black. Okay, so I have my wings in, and now I'm just going to take a look and see the wings and how they line up with the eyes. So I like how they line up, and now I am going to tie the wings in. So I'm going to take either side of this wing, making sure that these are both attached to this wing. You can go ahead and tug on them slightly, and if both sides are making this wing wiggle, then you have both strands for this wing. Go ahead and just tie a triple knot. Okay, so I did my triple knot on this wing here, and now I'm going to do the triple knot on the other side as well. Make sure that you are grabbing these two strands that are attached to this one wing, and then go ahead and do your triple knot, making sure that you are pulling tight enough to where the knot is going to be against the bee on the inside. That way you are not creating any slack for the bee to move. Okay, both wings are in, and then I have another bee here showing another way to put the wings in when it doesn't line up quite nicely when you put the two eyes in. So for this bee, if I put the wings right in between like I did with the other one, the wings will turn out a little bit uneven, which I'll show you in just a minute. Okay, so I'm going to put my wings in again like I did on the other bee. So if you look at my bee and the wings are a little bit off center, and then the same thing if I did it on the other side. So instead of putting the wings where I have them, where it's just in between the one stitch of yarn, just go ahead and move it one over and put it in the middle of this row of yarn. So I'm just going to take that wing out, and I'm going to put it in between this one row, or in the middle of the row. So your wings are going to be a little bit further apart, but that's okay too. Some people actually prefer the wings to be further apart. Some people prefer them to be closer. At my markets, people love both of the options. So once you have your wings even compared to where your eyes are, that's the most important part. Go ahead and tie your wings in, again, just using a triple knot. Okay, so I tied my wings in for this one, and now I'm going to move back to the original bee that we were working with. So now it's time to stuff the bee with some polyfill. Turn your bee to the back side. I am just going to pull my white strands of yarn out of the way, and I'm going to fill my bee with polyfill about halfway. Okay, so I've got some polyfill, and I am just going to push that polyfill down, making sure I'm getting all the way around. Now that my bee is halfway filled up, I'm going to take my strands of yarn, and I like to just kind of roll them in like so. And then I am going to take some more polyfill, and I'm going to put it over top my rolled up strands of yarn. Go ahead pushing your polyfill around. Okay, so there's my polyfill in. And now I'm going to take my yarn, and I'm going to go in a counterclockwise direction, or to the left. I am going to take that yarn. This time I'm going to be going from the inside of the bee towards the outside. Put that piece of yarn through and tighten. I'm going to do 3 of these before I do a bigger tightening of closing it up. Again, take your yarn, going from the inside of the bee towards the outside, push that yarn through that next loop over. Now I'm going to go back to the last loop. I am going to take my yarn here, and I'm just going to pull it to tighten, and then we're going to continue going. I'm just going to do 2 more, going from the inside towards the outside. Again, putting my thumb through here, that way as you pull it doesn't slip out this loop. And I'm just poking the polyfill back in as I go around to make sure it doesn't fall out. Okay, so I have 1 loop left, but before I put that last loop in, I'm just going to again tighten. Okay, so here's my last loop. I'm just going to pull that yarn through that last loop, and then I'm going to create a knot right at the base of the yarn like we did earlier on. Tie a knot like so, and then find the center of where you closed up that circle, just right here, and push that yarn through, including the knot that you created. Okay, so here is my closed up and finished bee. You can adjust the wings, and you can adjust the eyes if needed. So here's my completed bee. I am going to stuff this one real quick, and I'll show you how this one looks with a little bit of a further apart wings as well. Okay, and here is the bee stuffed and finished with the wings that are further apart. Thank you so much for joining me for the tutorial. Here's just a reminder that if at any point you needed help, you can always go back, rewind, practice each step until you get it down, and you can always slow down the video as well. So please email me if you need any help, have any questions with the email that was provided. I always love to help if you need any extra help. Thank you so much for joining. Please send me a picture of your completed bees. I always love seeing them.